Welcome to the Honest Business Podcast. This is the show for ambitious, value-driven business owners who are actively building a business that works for them. Hi, I'm May James, and I'm here to make scaling your business easier and more rewarding than ever. Each week, we will dive into simple, sustainable strategy and pragmatic leadership discussion to support you as you take imperfect action on your entrepreneurial journey. If you want to stay ahead, exceed your growth goals, and have a purposeful, thriving business, then keep on listening. Welcome back to the Honest Business Podcast. I hope you are well. Thank you for joining me. Today is a juicy episode. If you don't know who I am and you've just as the first one and you've rocked up, then give me some slack and maybe go and listen to some others because I am a really nice person, I promise. But yeah, we're going to unload some things today. And if you are regular and you listen every week, then hey ho, strap in. I hope you're excited. And this is one that people have asked for actually. So this is a really cool one because I've had many questions about this. I get asked about this a lot. And we're talking about, in case you haven't clicked on it because of the title, should you do market research in your business? Now, hold your horses. I know, who knew this could be such a controversial topic, but if you are in my world and have been for any length of time, you probably know that I have a funny relationship with market research. And so I thought, what better way to have this open discussion than through the podcast? So welcome back to the podcast, and we are going to dive straight in. I'm going to keep this episode as short as possible because I don't want this to just be me, having a conversation and a rant, and that's not what this is for. This is about me giving you my ideas, my thoughts, my kind of process and thought process behind it, and also giving you a kind of some key things to think about of when to do it and when I would suggest not and how to do it well and etc. etc. So this is not just me having a rant. Do not worry. So, what I am going to kick off with is talking about when you should do market research. Now, just as a kind of overstatement and blank statement here, when I talk about market research, let's think about what we're talking about first. Many people have different definitions of this. What I'm generally talking about, generally? Oh, sorry. Oh, the dyslexic brain is kicking in already. Again, if you've not listened before, I am severely dyslexic. I say the wrong things. I mispronounce words. I have all sorts of bizarre speech things that seem to happen. So you can maybe make it a drinking game for every time I say the wrong word or phrase. But yeah, that's just me. You'll probably either love me or hate me. And that's okay. So market research, what we talk about that, what I mean is people going out and collecting data of some kind or speaking to a set amount of people about a certain topic to do with their business, i.e. they might be launching a new product and they want information, they want to find information about certain current products, they basically want to data gather in some way. And when we talk about data gathering, which essentially is what market research is, it's about getting people's opinions who are not your own and who isn't the founders and who isn't maybe the teams, and finding out and hearing those different opinions. So the first thing I want to say off the back of this is that this is a data collection exercise. Whether people like to admit that or not, it is. Now, some of you would say that I am a skeptic. I am very down to earth, very no bullshit, very just honest and to the point. And I am in my life. I am in business. It's just who I am. And it has served me very well for many times. It also doesn't serve you sometimes, but that's okay. We are all allowed to have that kind of thing go on and make mistakes, and that's okay. It just is what it is. And I'm sharing that with you because I think it's important for you to know that I make mistakes all the time, and I will, well, that's a whole other podcast, isn't it? But yeah, whatever. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay for you to do things wrong, say the wrong thing, overstep the line, whatever it is for you. Right. What were we even talking about? This is one of these episodes where I'm like, come on, mate, stay on track. It was supposed to be a short and snappy one. So when we talk about market research, we're talking about data collection, and people don't like it when I make it really simple like that and just say it is data collection, because that's what it is. So first, get really clear with yourself of it's a data collection exercise. It's not an academic study. And yes, we'd love for it to be an academic study because actually a lot of the time that's going to be a lot more valid. But what my main point from this is to say that most data collection activities end up being highly unreliable and highly invalid. So that's my first point. And this is why I'm going to say everything I say in this episode, you need to take us with a pinch of salt. All the market research theory you hear, all of the theory you hear about everybody plowing loads of money into it, like, be really clear with yourself of like how valid it's going to be in the end. And we see this time and time again when we look at consumer reports and when we look at marketing and marketeers, especially in the UK. Marketeers are so out of touch with consumers. And I know we've gone on a tangent here, but stay with me. So when we look at data that says marketeers think that consumer behavior believes this to be true and consumers want this and they believe in X, Y, and Z, when you actually poll consumers, the amount in which the percentages of which marketeers believe things to be true are often vastly different to what they actually are. So they can be much more exaggerated than they are. So a great example of this is like, many people will say like, the people buy from the brand and they buy this thing and they buy that thing. And then when you actually look into consumers, yes, that's true to some degree. It's never at the rate that the marketeers are choosing to believe it is, right? Because that's bias. It's because we're all living in a bubble. We're all biased all the time, 100% of the time, every day. And it's unavoidable to some degree. So really want you to think about when you're doing market research, it's inevitably going to be biased in one way or the other. And everything I say today, you can argue is biased completely because I'm going to suggest you to almost lean into the bias, which is a kind of a neutral approach. So let's just we'll just park that for one piece, but I like to kind of share that with you because I think it's important. And let's move on to when to do it. So when do I think you should do market research? I think to validate ideas is great and it's fine. I think my issue with market research is that it should not be, let's do market research to find the new idea. That to me is not cool. I would say you can use it to validate your ideas and validate your theories and validate your hypotheses and do whatever you need to do, but I would not go on a kind of bear hunt to find the latest and greatest thing because I just don't believe it to be true. I also think you can do market research around a new offer, but I have very strong parameters around what that is, and I'm going to go into that as we go through this episode. I think if you're changing direction in your business, market research can be a great option for you. I think if you are a product-based business, then market research is really, really valuable. Much more valuable, I argue, than service-based, which, again, people may disagree with, but I just personally feel like if you have a product-based business, I'd really encourage you to lean into market research. I'd also, and my favourite use of market research is about finding out about your existing clients. That is, for me, where the real gold of this exercise lies, and it's where the most informed change can come from it, and the validity can be a lot higher as well, I argue. Like, I really think if you are going to use this to kind of help your existing clients in terms of finding out more about your existing clients, I really buy into that as an idea and a concept, and I've seen it work really well. So those are kind of my 5 key areas that I believe when to do market research. I want to talk about when not to do it, because I think that that's important. So let's just go through that a minute. I don't believe you should do it on a spur of the moment. So please just don't go and just decide like, oh, I'm gonna, just gonna do some market research. Why not? And I hear this all the time. People are like, oh, I'm just gonna do some market research. Why not? Sounds great. Let's do some market research. That's just not the vibe for me. Right? I'm just like, no, not good. Also, don't do it when you're feeling lost. This is like the worst thing you can do, and yet this is when everyone does it. So please don't think like when you're feeling lost, and if sales are not like great and you're a bit quiet and you've got loads of time in your hands, don't think now's the time to go and do market research. And again, many of the other experts and industry leaders are going to say, do it, it's a great time. But from a mindset perspective, from you interpreting data perspective, I just don't think it's good. So I would say don't do it. If you are in a space of needing validation and the business is in space of validation, people love running to market research to do that. So as much as I'm saying validate your ideas with it, great. What I'm not saying is go and validate the whole business idea. So if you are like pivoting your business or you're changing up something and you want to validate the whole business concept, as in the value proposition of the business, I just don't think it's great. Because I think what you end up with is just amalgamation of 10 different people's random thoughts that you then construe to mean what you want it to. And I know this sounds brutal, but like, you're on this podcast because you're interested in my opinion, and this is my stark opinion, which is driven, I'm not going to say it's fact because it's not, but it's driven from data that I use. You know, I suppose you could call it a meta-analysis, but I don't like to use that word because it's not an actual meta-analysis study. But, you know, for various different clients and businesses, please don't go and like, if you do not know if the business is really like, if that messaging sticks or whether that, you know, new idea is going to stick, I don't think it's worth you validating the whole business proposition via market research. The other thing when I would suggest you don't do market research is when the business isn't going well. Now, this, you know, when the business isn't going well is like a bit wishy-washy in itself, right? What I mean by that is, if you are having a really crap 2 or 3 months, I wouldn't then like start using that as a solution. There's much better things you can be doing with your time that are going to massively impact the business positively than you going and doing a whole market research activity / project. So that's my kind of thoughts on that. As we talk through this, the next kind of thing that comes up that makes the most sense is, what stage of business are you at? So for me, my opinion on market research and what you need to use it for changes depending on where you're at. So let's just talk through a few scenarios and then where I kind of think it fits. So if you're rapidly growing, I think market research is a great idea, like a really, really great idea. I really encourage you to do it. And I really would encourage you, if you can, to get somebody external to do it for you, if at all possible. I know that's expensive sometimes. I mean, it depends on your industry. But if you can, I'd really recommend that you as the business owner don't go and do it, and that you can get someone else to support you in that. If you are starting up with no clients, this is controversial, but I don't think you need to, which I know I'm going to get hate for, but hey ho. I really think that if you are starting up, you've got an idea, you've got no clients, I don't think you should go and spend hours and hours on market research. I really just don't think you need to. I think you will naturally have done some, which I'll talk you through later on in the episode, that will allow you to give you enough kind of pivotal experience for you to be able to make clear decisions on. I just don't think you need to sit for hours and hours. I've seen people spend so much time on it, and it doesn't get them anywhere, right? Because inevitably the business you're building now, if you're just starting out, is never going to be the same business that it is in 6 months' time or a year's time or 5 years' time. Like, there's just so much to learn and do and change that I just don't think it's a good use of your time. If the world was endless and we had all the time in the world, then yeah, potentially maybe. But like, realistically, none of us do. So let's just get really clear on the fact that I don't think you need to go and be mad on how much you're going to do if you're starting up. If you are pivoting your business, then this is where it becomes a maybe, and I think yes, but you need to be strategic. So if you are pivoting, and you're pivoting in a way that is going to massively affect your existing consumers, that's when I think it's really valuable to do so, because it gives you a conversation point. But if you're just pivoting and you're pivoting because you're shitting yourself because, you know, X, Y, and Z hasn't happened for you, then I don't agree with it. I really don't. And I think you need to focus internal rather than like externally gathering more and more data, because the reality of it is if you're pivoting a business, the thing you need to do is analyze all of the data you have of why you're pivoting, and that takes up a hell of a lot of time if you do it right. So you can gather so much data about your business that it will help guide the decision, and then at the point in which you've done all that and you've analysed it, you then might be able or might need to want to validate an idea, like I mentioned before, with a piece of market research. But I do not think you should just randomly decide, like, right, we're pivoting, next step, let's go and do market research. I just don't think it's good. I don't think it's long term. I don't think it just doesn't make sense from a strategic perspective. And as someone who's an expert in strategy, that is my kind of clear-cut opinion on that one. So we've kind of got through this part. You might be now thinking, what market research do you think is good, Nathan, seeing as you are, seeing as you seem to be really harsh and unpleasant about it? Here are 4, maybe 5 of the key areas that I really value when it comes to market research, and I think have more kind of weighting than others. So the biggest one I love is internal data gathering and client data gathering. So what I mean by that is going on a data collection exercise, which may be that you do send them a survey or have an interview or do whatever. But it's more so about, I want you to look at it as like, the market research is not the interview. It's not like I'm going to go and interview 10 clients. That's not the market research. I want you to view the market research as a data collection activity that then might, 1/5 of that might be that you go and have the interview, but it's kind of playing in the part of a whole collective thing that's building a picture for you. So it's almost like you're in a kind of law case and you're in a lawsuit and you're building up different arguments and different pictures and different, what's the word? Oh my goodness, I can't get the word. Perspectives. That's not the word I was looking for, but that'll work. Perspectives of different areas for you to look at. That is a great kind of thing to do. And you can do that internally and externally. And that's obviously going to be like a primary data source because you are, you're doing that yourself. The other one that I really love is secondary data. I love secondary data. I think secondary data is so misunderstood. It's misused. Yes, it's not always the most valid or reliable, but at the end of the day, the one you're collecting isn't either. If we are going down that route of arguing, is it or isn't it? So I personally, as long as you use a lot of intelligence and, you are realistic, I think using secondary data, i.e. trend analysis, is really, really great. I love using trend analysis. I love looking at what is going on with the business? What is kind of happening across the board? Because that's really key. And many of you will do this already. And this is what I was saying before about you already do some of it. So like, for example, you're already kind of cultivating this inside of yourself of looking at trend analysis. The other thing to think about when I say what market research do I think is good, I think interviews are good, which I've mentioned. So I do think sitting down with someone and having a long form conversation with open questions and collecting primary data can be really great. I just think, again, it's not about us rocking up to an interview and like, oh great, we're just going to interview someone. The person you're interviewing, it needs to be really clear and specific before you find the person. And then once they agree to an interview, the actual interviewer who's doing it needs to really have clear objectives, have clear kind of questions, thought processes, ways of going about the interview that actually get to the nukes and the kind of stuff of what you want. Because many people, and I've seen this again in businesses across the board, across industries, spend all this time, maybe money, on market research, and they haven't even, at the end of it all, they've done this whole thing and they still haven't got what they actually wanted in the end. They haven't got the piece of data or the kind of tone of voice or the thing that they were looking for in the first place, because it gets lost, and it inevitably does, right? This stuff, it's not that you've done a bad job, it's just inevitably it gets lost somewhere down the line. And so please think about, like, what is it that you're doing, and are you spending enough time planning this? Like, people, I know on here I sound like I'm really against market research, and I'm not. I'm just kind of very honest and open with it. I help people plan market research. Like if they come to me and say, right, we do need to do market research around something, I can help them plan a strategy around that. Bear in mind, I'm a strategy consultant. That's what I can do. So I can help them plan a strategy around that so that it is really effective and so that it is really good. But I just come on here to kind of warn you as a small business owner to say, don't fall into this trap of feeling like you have to do everything that these people say you have to do, because market research is one of those that I think it's a take it or leave it situation. My fourth area of market research that I think is good to do and that I like the kind of facilitation of is using a company like a market research company and having a big budget. Now, as much as that's just sounds unhelpful, I'm just being honest with you. I think if you do want to do some like really amazing market research, get an external company, whether that's an agency, a market research company. There's so many different people that will do, depending on your industry and what you want and the sort of things you're doing, will provide that for you. And also have a big budget. Don't go to these companies and don't go and just be so limited in the budget, because you're going to really see a difference of what they can do. And they will openly tell you that. If it's a good company or agency or person that delivers this kind of stuff, they will say, realistically, we need X amount for order for this to get the best result. We could do it in X amount, but be aware that X and Y might happen. And you really want to, whilst I'm not saying overspend on it, I do think you need to be really clear on what you want the market research for. I.e., if you are a beauty brand, then your market research tends to be really important. And you might have to spend on that, because actually the results you get from that could potentially give you what you need for a year's strategy down the line. So that can be great. If you have a subscription box, market research can be really good. Product, as I said before, product-based business, it makes a lot more sense for. If you are a service-based business owner, yes, it's useful, but I just don't think it's worth the investment a lot of the time, unless you're at a point where you're scaling so rapidly that you need that intel. But for most people, I just don't think it makes sense, because when I'm saying to you, use a company and have a big budget, when you look at that investment and what other things you could invest it in, even in other marketing areas, the kind of return on investment can be a lot bigger. If you are a service-based small business owner, I want to just run through some things of what not to do, in my opinion, because I want this to be practical for you. So in terms of what I wouldn't do, I'd be very skeptical of just going and asking friends and family, because I just don't think that's a good option. And I know people think it is, but personally I just think it's just, I don't know, I just don't think it makes sense. What worries me when we do market research is when you start looking at pricing, because that inevitably is just a complete minefield of information that people are benchmarking themselves against. How much a jar of Marmite costs, how much their Netflix is. I mean, it just gets so out of hand. So especially if you are selling B2B, as in business to business, and you are then asking just random consumers who are never going to buy from you, it's not worth it. So I wouldn't do it. Even if your product is selling, D2C, say direct to consumer, you still need to make sure that the person you're asking the question is the person you want to buy the brand. And that might not even be the person who is buying the brand right now. And I think this is another thing that you need to think about of, is there any point in you collecting data and doing market research if the clients or the customer that you have right now is not even the true person that's meant for the brand? And when I say that, what I mean is, a lot of the times we can start businesses and we can be successful, but the actual customer who we serve is not actually the one it was meant to in the first place. Now that might be fine, you might decide to pivot, you might be like, oh, actually that's a better option for me, but you also might not. And so I want you to really be, think about that of actually, is this even the person that we wanted to serve? Because if it isn't, then you need a restructuring campaign and you need to relook at how are you going to get the right people. But that answer is not going to be found in market research. You're going to drive yourself down the completely wrong path if you start going down that avenue. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. The other things of what I wouldn't do is, please do not disguise market research calls or interviews or any kind of market research as a sales call. That infuriates the life out of me and I hate it. So if you're a coach, a consultant, graphic designer, if you are anybody who, operates in maybe the online business space as well, I just don't like it. I think it's completely wrong that we then, some people will be like, oh, come and have a market research call. But then it doesn't really, that's not really what it is, it's something else. And that doesn't sit well with me, because I just think it's rude, it's disingenuous. And often the people who do this are the people who can't sell. Let's just lay this out on the table. So if you are someone who has done this before and you feel like, oh yeah, I'm guilty of this, and maybe it hasn't felt great to you either, maybe you've done it and now you're thinking, yeah, it didn't feel good. Or, you kind of used it as market research and you're scared of sales. You can't sell, you're unsure, you're desperate for sales, and you're trying to find the easiest way for you to sell without having to actually sell. That in itself is a recipe for disaster. Your business will catch up with you and it isn't good. I would really encourage you to go and learn sales, come and learn from someone like me who teaches sales. and helps people love sales and find a way to sell that is unique to you and that is fits and feels good to you. You can go and love sales, and for that to be, your market research is not a sales activity. Yes, that is great if you do get sales from your market research, and I'm not saying that that's not possible, and I'm not saying that if you do it's disingenuous. All I'm saying is like some people use market research as a strategy to then like sell what they've talked about on the call to the person, and I just don't think that makes sense. Yes, there might be like 1 out of 10 person where you're like, oh my goodness, they're an amazing fit. But what I mean when I'm saying using it as a sales call is some people use it like all the time, and they just do it because nobody else is reaching out anyway. So they just use it as a way to kind of grasp that. Let's talk about how to make it simple. So when we talk about making market research simple, and what I would suggest you do is I would make it appealing to people. So you can do this on a really small budget, but it might be that if you want to really get some decent, strong quality data, that you want to give something away in return for their time. So maybe that's, they are going to do a 30-minute interview with you and you're happy to give them 30 minutes of your time back. Or it might be that you're going to do them a website audit, or, it might just be that they're put into a raffle, like a hat to win a £50 Amazon voucher. I don't know. Like, it can just be anything, right? A £20 Amazon voucher. It could be, just something to reward people. I think is nice, and I think it's fine. You will get people who are happy to do market research for you for free, and that's totally up to you if you wish to, and that, it's fine. It depends on the mode, right? If you're just asking people to fill in 4 or 5 questions on a questionnaire and it's a tick box, then that's fine, and you might not need to. But if you want some like real quality responses, you might need to kind of help people and reward them in some way. If you're going to do in-person market research, snacks was always a great idea. Feeding people, keeping them well fed, that really, like, people love that kind of thing. And I've seen that work really well, even if you are someone who's going to go and do it kind of on the street. And there's different, depending on where you are in the world, there's different laws around that, and you need to check that out in your own kind of, your own region and what you are and not allowed to do. But if that's something you want to do because you're a consumer brand, I've seen really cool things of, helping people to kind of seal the deal on whether or not they're going to be happy to do the market research by having some kind of guaranteed prize type thing for each person, i.e., boxes of chocolates or whatever you want to do. So yeah, I think that is really important. I think focus groups can really help make it simple. So if you're someone who's thinking, oh my goodness, I do not have the time to like be going and doing individual interviews, focus groups can be really great, and they can allow you to obviously access a much higher volume of data, in a shorter space of time. And also often it's great because the people in the group, if they're similar, can really bring out a much more honest, valid information because everybody's kind of sharing their own thing. What I would say on that, if you're going to do a focus group, is just spend the time of getting another person in there. Like, if you're leading the group, get somebody there to be able to record it, to be able to, note take, describe, like whatever they need to do to make sure you pick up all the data. Because the worst thing happens is when people come out and they're like, oh, it was really good. And I'm like, okay, where's all the data? And they're like, oh, it's just what I think or what I've managed to write a few notes down. Like, your notes is not the data. We need other data surrounding that. Obviously, if you're going to do any of this, you really need to look into GDPR. You need to make sure that you are, or your similar data protection laws in your country, and really make sure that you are abiding by all the rules, because, market research, we are collecting data, and when we're collecting data, it's really important that we're respecting people's privacy, etc. So just make sure whatever you do choose to do, that you're really recording everything and that there's going to be something on the end of it. Because market research is not just an activity for you to get a feeling. It's not about feelings. And as much as you want it to be, it's just not. So you don't want to just come out and be like, oh, that was great, and it's really validated this idea, and I'm really like, yeah, this is amazing. Like, I love that for you, but that's not the point of this exercise, and we need more. So make sure you're video recording it if you want to, or at least have an audio or whatever it's going to be, whether you're doing that virtually or in person. The other things to make it simple is use Instagram. So one of the things I love doing is via Instagram and using Instagram stories as market research. I have done this for years now. I think it's amazing. I think it's so good. And that is really big. Now, some of you will have been trying to do this and you might be like, mate, it doesn't work, no one votes, and that's like a whole thing. And I totally relate to you because I've had periods of time where nobody voted on mine. When I first started, no one did for a long, long time, and I kept doing them. People didn't vote. And I'm just sharing that with you because I think that's important for you to know, that just because people aren't voting doesn't mean you should stop doing them. The more you keep doing them, the more likely it is that someone actually one day is going to vote. And what I would say is, when you're using Instagram stories as like a poll or a quiz or to gather information and put in question boxes, you need to be careful on the copy that you're putting. So the copy is really, really everything. And I have really played around and still do with what words do we use? What works best? How do you structure a question? I can ask the same question, but depending on how I word it, I will get like 10 times more responses just from changing one word. Now that is like really tedious, but it is true. So if your Instagram does not, like, if you feel like your people are just not engaged and they don't help you in that sense, then you need to really start tweaking it. But as I say, in order for that to work, you've got to keep doing it consistently. So using Instagram stories is a perfect way. I actually think it's really good as well because it helps you identify who's actually interested in your audience as you as a business. I'm not saying they're interested in what you're trying to sell or the thing you're trying to validate. I'm just saying to you, it helps you to gauge who is out there, because there's people who vote on my stuff who I've never spoken to. I have no clue who they are. And it's a really nice thing to be like, oh, okay, they obviously have some kind of interest or follow along or, you know, read something. And so I would really encourage you to go down the Instagram stories route. But again, it needs to be clear. It needs to be concise. It needs to make sense. I think don't make it like 20 questions long. I would say 5, 6, max kind of 7, but even then I think 5's kind of a good 5 to 7 maybe is like where it's nice, a nice spot. And do a mixture of polls, question boxes. The question boxes you're going to get less responses from, so just bear that in mind, but it's good to have a mixture of everything. You can use the slider and you can put like the slider feature on Instagram, and you can put different kind of pointers of where someone feels on the slider. You can also use the quiz, which is a really nice option, especially if you've got more than 2 options. Obviously, remember that if you are using Instagram stories and you're using the poll features and things, they are quite closed questions and you're going to get very structured data because it's going to be very much like picker. You are almost asking a leading question and giving them potential answers and they are choosing. So there is issues with that and there is limitations to it, but I just wanted to put that on there because I think it's a really simple and easy, actionable thing that you can do every week if you want to, you know, like that is how the joy of it is, of that you can keep doing it. The other thing I love to do with this is LinkedIn. LinkedIn has polls and people love voting on them. I mean, people say they don't, and there's like a whole thing on LinkedIn where people are like, oh, we hate a poll. But actually, you can put them up and I can get a really great response from that. Now, typically with a poll on Instagram, on LinkedIn, the only thing you're going to have to deal with is the fact that you can only really ask one question. But what is interesting with that is you do tend to get, although it's like a yes, no, maybe, and you can edit the buttons, so that's really cool, you do tend to get people who are leaving comments underneath. So I think that's a really lovely way of kind of, although it's only one question, you do tend to get a more qualitative and quantitative response because people are quite open in their, they'll easily write a paragraph or 2 sentences or a sentence even, which gives you more context. So there's pros and cons to both. I would say utilize them both and really see what you get. I also think it's interesting if you want to run the same market research but on LinkedIn and Instagram and see the differences, because there will be a vast difference depending on your connections and things, but realistically there will be a vast difference. I tend to ask very different questions, you know, on the 2 platforms, but that's because I was segmented in a way for that to make sense. But yeah, use Instagram. I think Instagram's something that you probably know. Like, I'm not saying it's new to you. You'll be like, yeah, of course, like we know that. But I think having the insight and the know-how to say, yeah, keep it simple and then utilize it and be consistent around it is really good. Now, what I'm not going to go into here is then using Instagram stories and polls and quizzes as a sales, like to lead into your sales funnel. That's a whole other episode. I'm talking about market research in this, and the market research piece is about you saying to people, hey, would love to have your thoughts on this. It's a no pitch zone. You don't have to say that, but some people like to say that, which basically means you're not going to go and then sell them something, because again, a lot of consumers are so savvy, followers are so savvy, a lot of them don't want to vote on something if they think you're going to then come down their neck selling to them. And this is what I was saying before about like people have really ruined it and ruined market research in this way because they've position things as market research when in fact they haven't been, and that they've been like people have then tried to sell them something. So I think do that, and that will make it really simple for you, because the biggest thing you need to do is be more simple. And I'd much rather you have slightly more consistent volume of data and volume of market research than having like one massive gigantic piece that you've paid a lot of money for but is only valid in that moment that you did it. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you can only do that, then fine, but like that's limited in itself. Whereas if we can collect, which I'm going to go on to, consistent data over a long period of time, that's where the real magic comes, and that's where you can really start interpreting it. And so I'd rather you have the Instagram stories, the focus group, like whatever it is that you can manage and do quite easily. That is really key. The survey maybe every month, whatever, that will really help you. So the next part of this is to talk about how to interpret the data you have and what to do with it. This is a big one. So this is basically linked with decision making. So what I want to go through here is, how do you interpret the data, and then how do you make decisions for the business based off what you have got, or do you even make decisions off it? So the first thing I want to say is, please do not change everything once you get this information. And I know I'm going like back a step here, but I want to kind of tell you what to do with it or what not to do with it, and then we can go into interpret it, because it'll make more sense. So please don't go and change everything. You have all the data. Do not go and change everything in your business just because somebody said something and you're like, oh my god, that's the complete opposite of what we're doing. Please do not do that. You also need to sense check the information you've gathered, and do you agree with your data? Now, I'm not saying you have to agree with it or you have to disagree with it, but you need to actually ask yourself that from like an objective perspective of actually, right, what do I think as the founder, CEO, MD, whatever you are? What do I think of the data? Then also look at it from, what does the business think of the data in relation to like where you're going and what your plans have been for the next 6 months, 12 months, etc. What would they kind of position as if they were a person? And I tell you to record this, like write it down. You then want to look at, is it aligned, the data you've got, from your vision? So what is it telling you relating to your vision for the business? And does that make sense? Is it making sense? Is it adding anything? Is it taking anything away? Like, where is that sat? And have a think about that. And then be really clear on, do I need to action anything from this? Because sometimes you're going to get market research results where actually you don't need to do anything with it, which I know people are like, well, surely that's the complete pointless exercise. And that's not the case at all. Like, no, we're feeding into this whole data picture, which I'm going to talk about. But you need to really think about this of like, okay, what does this mean for me moving forward? And I would say that for most people, it's not a lot. It's just about tweaks. So it might be messaging tweaks, it might be positioning, it might be how you package something, it might be to do with your brand and the direction of your brand, it might be that you want to add an additional bolt-on service. That's fine, that's all cool, but I don't want it to be this like, right, we're going to rip the business apart and start again. Some of you might need to do that, but it's very, very rare, and it's not going to come as a result from you doing a bit of market research, is what I'm trying to say to you. It'll come from other things. So don't act too aggressively from what you get. So when it comes to interpreting the data, we could do a whole episode on this, but I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. And this is not coming from like a statistician perspective. This is just coming from a practical business perspective. You need to be objective. And you need to be clear on what you want from the interpretation of the data. Now, this in itself is going to make it invalid, right? But at the end of the day, you're doing this from a business perspective. This isn't a scientific or academic study. And so this is why I tell you to like be really optimistic, or not optimistic. What's the word? I don't know. Why people think I'm cynical, but I'm cynical because I know what goes on, right? And so when you're reading an industry report or you're reading something, you've got to remember, like, what did they want from the thing in the first place? And you need to do that when you're coming up with your own thing. Yes, it's going to be biased, but it's going to be filled with bias anyway. So you need to just be really clear on, are you being objective? Try and be as impartial as possible. Great. But also be clear on, what do you want from the data? As in, do you want qualitative data? Do you want quantitative data? Which are you going to focus on? Have you got both to deal with? Are you going to interpret quantitative data and try and shift it into qualitative, which is like a whole other discussion? But, you know, you need to really have a thought process in your head of, what is the point of this? You asked X question. What is it that you really want from it though? Because we can ask one question, but the one question can mean about 10 different things, depending on how we meant it. And so we need to get really clear on what is it that you want from it, because what do you want to be able to do with the information? So let's just take an example of maybe you ask somebody about, do you think the brand is a luxury brand? Let's just go with that one. And maybe it was like a yes, no, maybe, and maybe there was a box of like, why not? So you're going to have a mixture of data there. That question of, do you think the brand is a luxury brand, or do you think our brand, or do you think maybe you've inserted the name of the brand is a luxury brand, that can mean so many different things. And the reason you're asking that question is going to have so many different leading reasons. So I want you to think about, what is that for you? Like, what is that going to make sense? Like, where is that going to come into the overall picture of what you want an answer for? Because is it that you want to know if it's a luxury brand because your marketing's working, or that your brand colours are right? Or is it that you want to know if it's a luxury brand in terms of how much you're going to charge? Like, you need to make that clear. The biggest thing I can kind of tell you when you're interpreting your data is to benchmark the data long term. So you need to start collecting loads of data, having it stored in a system, which can be very simple. It can be a Google Doc, a Google Sheet, a whole CRM. It could be, well, I'm saying CRM, but like with a bit for market research, it could be, a project management. It could be anything. You need to have that data stored, and then we need to be going back to it and look, so that the first lot you do might not even be useful because you're like, well, I haven't got anything to benchmark it off. But the more you do and the more you can benchmark, it's going to really help. And so I want you to think about, how can you benchmark the data across other things if you can't do yours? So if you have none of your own primary from previous, maybe you want to look at other data that's been produced and how can you benchmark it. But essentially when I'm saying benchmark it, it's because I need you to start thinking about the business from a long-term perspective and what makes sense. Like, what realistically is it telling you? And has there been a drastic change? Because the change is the bit that's interesting. So that's the bit we're more interested in almost than just like the random answers. If something has been, say we ask that question, is X brand a luxury brand? And for the last 10 years, they've always said yes. Or for the last 24 months, they've always said yes. But now the majority have said no. That's a really interesting thing. That's the quality. That's the like piece of the market research that makes it all worth it, right? That's the bit where I'm like, bingo, why? And then we look into that. I'm not interested in all the other random fluff. Like, it might be helpful, but the bits that you want to see is the change. The change, any curves that don't make sense, anything that you're like, oh, that's really strange. Anything that doesn't match up to the strategy that you've been doing. Because you've got a strategy running alongside everything you do in your business, and you have a vision running alongside everything you do in your business. If, providing you worked with me, or you're in my world, or you kind of buy into that way of doing business, you're going to have those things running across at all times. So I need you to then be thinking, right, what doesn't make sense? If we've been doing X strategy and then the answers are the other way, that's the bit we need to like delve into and find out more about. And that's the thing that I think is interesting. Again, this is just my opinion, but this is where I've seen people really make moves in their business using market research, because it's actually allowed them to kind of do something that is practical and actually is in some ways highly useful. So that's my thoughts on the benchmarking along data. If you are more interested in this and you'd like to know more about this and how to interpret data, we could do a whole episode, so feel free to message me and be like, I'd love to know more about that, because we can do that. And then I wanted to finish this episode on sharing with you what I do, in the sense of how I do consistent market research. Because you might have felt like throughout this episode, I'm not particularly the biggest fan of it. However, I do it. I do value it to some degree. So I have not ever, let's just put this out on the table of what I do and what I don't do. I have never paid an agency or market research company or anything of that realm that we've talked about personally for my brands and for my businesses. Not against it, I just haven't done it. And I tend to go down the route of Instagram, LinkedIn, more like socials, informal type of market research. And then I'm going to go into the other bits I do. So just so you have a kind of overview of it. There's definitely a lot more that I could do, but again, it comes down to time and resource, right? And that's what I was saying to you earlier in the episode. Like, I'm no different to you. I'm a small business, and time is of the essence, and time is money. And so you have to make a strategic decision, and you weigh up what do you need and what don't you need. And so for me, market research has never been like the biggest thing on the list. As I've said, for some brands, it does make more sense for you to be that way, but for some, you really don't need it to be. So what do? I use observation all the time. So all the time in business, I am observing constantly, and it's draining. So I'm not saying you should do this. Some of you will already do this massively. Some of you might do it some of the time. Some of you will be like me and do it all the time. It is a constant thing that I do. So every single day in business, whether I'm at work in air quotes or whether I'm just existing in my day-to-day life, I am constantly observing. And it's like my other half can tell, and sometimes he's like, mate, come on, like snap, if we're on holiday, say. And like I've switched off from the business, but because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a business owner, and my head just constantly swings that way, he can tell I'm just processing all the time, processing. Now that is not valid, and that's not what I was saying before about you tracking it and having data. Like, that is not a valid way of market research, but I'm just being honest with you of what I do. So that is this constant observation where I'm sense checking things, where I'm looking at things, I'm analysing what other people are doing, and that really kind of helps me hugely in business. And I know that it does, and that's why I'm sharing it with you, to be open and honest with you. The next thing is I get market research a hell of a lot from clients. So much of my market research in my business is driven by clients. The clients that I work with are so varied. They're across different industries. They're at different points of business. They make different amounts of money. They have different staffing issues. Like, in terms of my kind of work, that in itself is just filled with market research and filled with direction and understanding and data. And so for me, my daily work gives me that, if that makes sense. Like, it gives so much that I can understand, and I see trends. And so what I'm saying is, I then take, I suppose you could say, observation from clients, but then I can convert that into data, and I can convert it into observational analysis, and then looking at, wow, okay, this person with this situation has this problem, but also this person over here who is in a completely different industry also has this problem. Isn't that interesting? And you can delve into that. And so for me, whilst it sounds a bit vague saying clients and observation as two different things and combined together as one, it really is about the longer term thing of it, of what I've just mentioned, about collecting the data over time, and I get to see patterns, and we use patterns and observation to guide what we do as a business, and it's very intuitive and it's very forward thinking in the sense of we're anticipating what's next. You also have to remember that part of my job is I do trend prediction. I would never call myself a trend predictor, but I am that, trend analysis I do a lot. And so for me, the observation allows me to do that anyway. So I'm kind of already doing it in a sense. The other thing I do is understand the market that I operate in. So a lot of my market research can be secondhand because I can just see what other people are doing. Now, obviously you can't see everything that every business is doing, but I can see a lot of what goes on, and I spend a lot of time looking at that. And now I'm not saying I go and do competitor analysis. That's completely different, and that's not, to be honest, something we really do a lot of at all. It's more so about understanding the market and seeing how the market plays out and how on a macro level things are working and things aren't. And that really helps me to kind of know where we're going. And you can tell, like, from those three things I've mentioned, it's constant, right? So some of you, this is why I'm not saying you should go and do this, because that's not going to work for many people, and that's fine. Some of you it might, some of you will do this already, some of you will do way more than me. Like, I am all about, in this conversation in business and my work, it's all about, not about me teaching what I do. It's about, you can hear what I do, but you get to build your own strategy, and I give you many different things. And this is how I work in my programs, in my private consultant, my coaching. This is how we work. We work in a way of like creating something bespoke to you. Because what I've just enlisted there is quite a lot, and it's exhausting, and for some people it's like, I just wouldn't do it, and that's fine, and it works for me. The final thing for me of how I do constant market research is I'm always learning. And because I'm always learning, that in itself feeds so much data to me, because I'm always learning from both an academic level, from a practical level, from a skill set level, from learning stuff that is completely outside of my remit of my job and my industry, but I'm always learning. And that in itself breeds communication, it breeds connection, and it allows for market research to be done at all points. I'll give you an example of this. So sometimes, I might enroll on a course or a program, and a lot of that is market research. A lot of it I will be doing market research while I'm in there. That's not saying what I really want to clarify this. This is not me going in there finding clients. It's not me going in there and selling. That's not at all what I'm saying. Because I know some of you will your brains will go there. What I'm saying is I go in there and I find out way more about an ideal client, or I find out way more about a certain client set that's maybe not even in my industry, but it's interesting to me longer term, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. My market research is not reactive. It isn't really instantaneous. My market research is longer term stuff, and I look at it for much more legacy building stuff and much more about trying to be further ahead, in terms of where I was planning and our strategy in advance. And so for me, being able to, if I say join a course, I then see the learning journey of other people who may be at my level, maybe they're way ahead of me, maybe they're behind me. That doesn't really matter because of what I do and the nature of what I do. I help people at all sorts of different levels of their journey. It allows me to see more. It's about human behavior. It's about how they what they're struggling with and how that kind of shows up for them and where they kind of show up in the world and their business. And that really allows me to create a big picture. So those 4 that I've mentioned might seem a bit random and off the hook, but I just wanted to mention them because that is what I genuinely do. And yes, it's time consuming. Yes, it's very draining, but also it makes me very good at my job. And so for me, I see it as a kind of 2-pronged approach, because some would argue that part of my job is about fully understanding the kind of business world that we exist in. And so that is it's kind of a two-way street. But yes, that is all I wanted to cover today. I know this has been a long one and I didn't intend it to be. I thought it was just going to be a 20-minute. But as always, I hope you can appreciate me being as honest as possible and kind of throwing everything out there for you. I really hope this is useful. Please come and find me on Instagram and just drop me a DM and tell me what you get from the podcast or what you've gotten from this episode, if anything. I love hearing from you. It really kind of interests me to see where you've kind of found some value from whatever you're listening to. Take care, and I will speak to you soon. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Honest Business Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure that you are subscribed. And if you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others and leave a rating and review. To catch up with all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram @may.james_, where I share the raw, uncut, behind the scenes reality of what running multiple businesses every day truly looks like. As always, links and any resources that were mentioned in the episode will be in the show notes below. That's all for this episode, and I look forward to seeing you next time.